Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking, here to present episode 50. That's almost 100, and I can think of few better games to talk about than BioShock. Released on Xbox and PC in August of 2007, and PlayStation in October the following year. Developed by Irrational Games, temporarily renamed 2K Boston for some reason, it was designed to be the spiritual successor to the game director Ken Levine's previous project, System Shock 2, which, in the director's own words, sold about 5 copies, though it has since gone on to be seen as incredibly ahead of its time. The team really liked the isolation of System Shock 2's spaceship setting and wanted to create a similar setting while still being entirely different. They quickly settled on the idea of an underwater city, eventually adopting the Art Deco style a la Rockefeller Center, and using the low poly designs of that style and the lack of FOV underwater allowed them to make the city feel way more open than it really was, while still maintaining that feeling of isolation. From there, the question arose as to who would build a city underwater and why. And that's where dystopian writers George Orwell, Aldous Huxley, and especially Ayn Rand came in to create Ayn Rand's Rule 63 counterpart, Andrew Ryan. More on him later. From there, the main question became, who are you? And after many different playtests and rewrites, we eventually got the answer to that question, but we almost never even got this far. Due to System Shock 2's poor sales, no publishers were eager to work with them, so the team used a big brain strategy and reached out to a journalist from GameSpot to publish an article about their demo, skyrocketing the game's popularity overnight and getting publishers practically knocking their door down to pick up the game. 2K Games were the lucky ones because I just can't seem to escape them. So punch your ticket for your journey underwater, because it's about time we venture down and give it everything we've got! The game begins by letting us know that we're somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean in the year 1960, and the one time in the entire game that our protagonist Jack speaks.
They told me, son, you're special. You were born to do great things. You know what? They were right.
Fun fact, that wasn't in the game until right before the release. It was added as the developers saw focus testers not engaging with the story or understanding their role in it. The game started with a crashed plane, but the original starting point was after the crash. Seemingly the only survivor, Jack swims to the conveniently located lighthouse and steps inside to be greeted by a giant bust of a strange-looking man. He descends further and enters a bathysphere, a short-lived submersible used between 1930 and 1934. As the bathysphere pulls him fathoms below the ocean surface. If you feel like doing math, 1 fathom equals 6 feet, or you could just listen to the special message.
I am Andrew Ryan, and I'm here to ask you a question. Is a man not entitled to the sweat of his brow? No, says the man in Washington, it belongs to the poor. No, says the man in the Vatican, it belongs to God. No, says the man in Moscow, it belongs to everyone. I rejected those answers. Instead, I chose something different. I chose the impossible. I chose rapture. A city where the artist would not fear the censor, where the scientist would not be bound by petty morality, where the great would not be constrained by the small. And with the sweat of your brow, rapture can become your city as well.
No big deal, this is just one of the greatest openings in video game history, as it immediately establishes who Andrew Ryan is in the magnificent setting you're about to explore. A radio in the bathysphere picks up a conversation between 2 men about something called splicers. But look at this place, I'm sure they're friendly.
No trespass. Just don't hurt me. Just let me go.
Oh my god, is this a horror game?
Would you kindly pick up that shortwave radio?
Yes, I will, since this radio will become very important. Due to the limitations of Irrational Games' studio and budget, they couldn't afford to make lots of different character models, so most dialogue will be over this radio. Anyway, this is the introduction to Atlas, yet another Ayn Rand reference, who will act as Jack's friend and guide him throughout the journey. Stepping out of the bathysphere gives us the first indication that this game will never not be pretty, and our first taste of the environmental storytelling that this game defined with anti-Ryan posters on the floor. Atlas helps take care of a splicer problem and politely asks Jack to find some sort of weapon. Luckily, there's a wrench just sitting there begging to be picked up. Progressing past a splicer's best effort to turn Jack into a baked couch potato brings him to the first combat encounter of this FPS RPG, and it's the GOAT. But seriously though, beating the fuck out of people with a wrench in this game will never stop being fun. It's also here that Jack and his wool knit sweater will pick up the first aid kit in an Eve hypo. The red bar in the top left tracks how much health you have, while the blue bar tracks how much Eve you have, and the numbers next to the bars indicate how many health kits / hypos you have. What is Eve and why is it important? Well, you'll find out in about 5 seconds, as following strange voices, always a good idea in horror and horror adjacent media, brings Jack to a gatherer's garden machine and their totally not creepy little girl statues. And as one does, Jack picks up the strange needle and jams it right into his arm.
Oh, dude, fuck the clinical trials. Inject that straight into my newborn baby.
This needle doesn't contain drugs that'll allow Jack to hear colors and see sound. It contains a plasmid, essentially splicing and rewriting his DNA to give him the power of electrokinesis. As you may expect, rewriting your genetic code is quite painful, and Jack passes out.
Look, Mr. Bubbles, it's an angel. I can see light coming from his belly. Wait a minute, he's still breathing. It's alright. I know he'll be an angel soon.
Ah yes, the Big Daddy and the Little Sister, the one part of this game that everyone knows it for, even those who haven't played it. Odds are, someone's first playthrough of BioShock on YouTube will include the line, "I know about the Big Daddy."
The little girl with her eyes that are like green and
I might even be wrong about this, but I think I've heard the name Big Daddy.
And I have a vague recollection of a diver with like a drill for a hand that I know is a character, and then a creepy little girl.
They are incredibly important to the plot, but not yet. For now, Jack gets up and uses his new plasmid power to open the door, preventing his progress. This is where Eve comes in, as each use of a plasmid will drain it. No Eve, no more plasmid use. Luckily, you will find plenty of hypos and health kits by scrounging through Rapture, searching bodies and containers. You can also find different food and drinks that will restore very small amounts for free. And despite the fact that Jack has 2 hands and only uses weapons with his right hand and plasmid with his left, you can't use both at the same time. However, using them in harmony will increase the damage you do, as Alice explains with the old 1-2 punch. One thing I do find slightly frustrating is that Jack will automatically use an Eve hypo when he runs out, if he has one, but he won't do the same for health kits. You can restore Eve manually as well, so it just seems weird to me. As Jack progresses up an elevator, Atlas tells him about his motivations.
Listen, I've got a family. I need to get them out of here. But the splicers have cut me off from them. If you can reach them in Neptune's bounty, then maybe, just maybe. I know you must feel like the unluckiest man in the world right now, but you're the only hope I'll ever see my wife and child again. Go to Neptune's bounty. Find my family, please.
What, you thought he was going to help us escape without asking for something in return? A few steps ahead, Jack murders a mother and decides to adopt her baby pistol. Hey, it's better fate than what Atlas says was happening to babies. Yet, as you may have been able to guess, repeatedly splicing your DNA to give yourself superpowers isn't exactly great for the body or mind. The effects of plasmids is one of the key factors in the downfall of Rapture, which, for all intents and purposes, completed on New Year's Eve 1959, as you can tell by all the party decorations that were never cleaned up. Fun fact, the Kashmir restaurant that Jack finds himself in is the art director's favorite part of Rapture, and there are many reasons to like it, aside from the splicers that are keen on popping out of nowhere and scaring the shit out of you, but at least you're in a bathroom. On the subject of splicers, while Jack did just pick up a pistol, the wrench is still very handy given that the pistol doesn't have very many bullets and won't for a while. This also serves as the introduction to the fact that using Electro Bolt on enemies standing in water will instantly kill all the enemies in the water, which is always satisfying. With all of them cleared out, Jack is free to explore and loot the place, including picking up the first 2 audio logs in the game. These are scattered all throughout Rapture and range in importance. For example, the one in the bathroom just tells you where to go next, and the other one is from Andrew Ryan's girlfriend Diane McClintock, and it reveals that the restaurant was attacked during the New Year's Eve party by a group of men, one of whom shouts "Long live Atlas." Interesting. The audio logs do a great job of expanding the story of Rapture and presenting the city from many different perspectives, all while having next to no actual character models in it. I won't be going over them all because there are 122 of the fuckers, but I will go over the important ones and bring attention to some of my favorites. Progressing through the hole in the wall, Atlas has another important message.
Careful now. Would you kindly lower that weapon for a minute? You think that's a child down there? Don't be fooled. She's a little sister now. Somebody went and turned a sweet baby girl into a monster. Whatever you thought about right and wrong on the surface, well, that don't count for much down in Rapture. Those little sisters, they carry Adam, the genetic material that keeps the wheels of Rapture turning. Everybody wants it, everybody needs it.
His line about right and wrong actually ties into a core element of the game, as the creators didn't want the game to be simply about good versus evil, but about how different circumstances influence people's decisions. For example, Andrew Ryan was born in Russia during World War I and witnessed the Russian Revolution destroy his family's business.
Communism sucks!
He later moved to America, where he became the wealthiest businessman in the country, but socialist policies introduced by FDR under the looked back on way more fondly than it should New Deal reminded him too much of the communist parasites that destroyed his family in Russia for his liking. The final straw being the detonation of the atomic bombs, as he believed the parasites now had the full ability to destroy anything they couldn't control. And looking at the way the world is now, he wasn't wrong.
Snaps, based, mic drop, yes.
Back to the story, Jack progresses to see a Big Daddy kill one man 5 different times for messing with his little sister, which will also be important later. All you need to know for now is that they're a package deal. If you find one, the other isn't far. Following after them, Jack comes across the Big Daddy's corpse with no little sister in sight, which is more sad than I care to think about right now. The entrance to Neptune's bounty is right down the waterfall, so let's just focus on that.
Security alert in progress.
Of course. After defeating a wave of thuggish splicers, the ones with the melee weapons, and leadhead splicers, the ones with the guns, Jack is informed that there is another way to Neptune's bounty through the medical pavilion. The last time I was trapped somewhere and had to go through a medical building, it went frighteningly well, so I see this being a walk in the park. Before he can get there, though, he is interrupted by a message from Andrew Ryan, who accuses him of working for the KGB or CIA and says trespassers are not tolerated, sending a group of splicers after him. Luckily, Atlas manages to open the door remotely and allow Jack to escape. Now in the medical pavilion, a message over the PA system talks about the threat Atlas's minions pose to Rapture, while Jack cares more about the funny clown vending machine, one of the places you'll be able to spend the money you pick up throughout the game. There's also an audio log from Miss McClintock again, where she talks about how a Dr. Steinman fixed up her nose after the New Year's Eve attack we heard about earlier. Poor Diane seems to be falling for the good doctor, and we'll see why that's a mistake. There's a security bot blocking the only accessible path, introducing the biggest weakness in this game: hacking. See, every time you perform a hack, you'll temporarily stop playing BioShock and start playing a mobile game you'd see on a fucking BlackBerry, as you have to connect a series of tubes on a grid from one point to another.
Totally tubular, dude!
It's nothing more than a minor annoyance now, but it becomes a huge pain later on when the hacks get more difficult and there are more things to hack. Right now, hacking a security bot will make it your ally. It'll follow you around and attack enemies for you until you deactivate it or it gets destroyed. And you can hack the Circus of Values vending machine to reduce the prices of the items and unlock items you couldn't buy otherwise. Jack looks to use emergency access, but in order to do so, he needs the key from the Dr. Steinman we just heard about. But hey, at least we get a machine gun for our journey. The weapons function much like the gadgets in the Arkham games. They're all locked behind story progression, and you'll hold on to them from that point on. The door deeper into medical is now open, and the above all do no harm message really loses its meaning when it's written in blood in front of a bloody gurney, Steinman. This area is home to the first 2 turrets, which are almost always placed in very annoying locations that you won't see until they're filling you with more holes than the plot of The Last of Us 2.
He's out of line.
But he's right.
However, much like the security bot, you can hack them to your side and they will instead shoot enemies. Also hackable in this room is the first ammo bandito vending machine that, as the name implies, exclusively sells ammo, and the health station, which will heal you for a price and heal enemies that attempt to use it. Hacking the vending machine produces the same result as a Circus of Values machine, and hacking the health station reduces the cost and damages enemies that attempt to use it instead. In adjacent rooms, there are also security cameras that will summon a swarm of security bots as they detect you. Hack the camera and it will instead send bots after enemies it detects. Steinman blocks the way forward and Atlas suggests that Jack find the telekinesis plasmid to chuck a grenade at the blockage, but the path is blocked by ice, so he first needs to retrieve the incinerate plasmid. There are plenty of audio logs scattered around this area that show Steinman's reaction to Adam and how it allows him to completely transform people more than he ever could. Which sounds good at first, but then he starts talking about becoming the Picasso of flesh, and yeah, now he's a Batman villain.
4-0 silk, and down.
The nose looks terrific, Dr. Steinman. Doctor?
You know, looking at it now, I didn't realize how much her face sags. Scalpel?
Excuse me?
Scalpel.
Doctor, she's not booked for a facelift.
Let's just come in here and...
Doctor, stop cutting. Doctor, stop cutting. Get me the chief of surgery! Get me the chief of surgery now!
It's also here that Jack can pick up his first tonic. Tonics give either permanent boosts or added effects that allow you to skew the game more toward your preferred playstyle. Upon injecting literal straight fire into his veins, Jack can now light enemies on fire, ignite pools of oil, and melt blocks of ice. One block of ice hides the entrance to a funeral home, now the home to the first door lock puzzle and safe. Certain areas will be hidden behind a 4-digit code, and the code will usually be hidden either on a paper nearby or in an audio log somewhere else in the game. However, you can also hack them to unlock the door without the code. You can also hack safes to open them and loot what's inside, though they're usually the toughest hacks in the game. Oh, also, failing hacks damages you and can summon security bots, so you really don't want to fail. Thankfully, you can get auto hack tools to bypass hacks when you really just can't be asked. Heading beyond the blocked ice path leads to a room with a free shotgun bathed in light. Score! You should have known that was a trap. Rapture is built on nothing being free. Well, except for story-required plasmids, those are just sitting around for your injecting pleasure. Sadly, you have to replace Incinerate or Electrobolt as you have limited plasmid slots, so it's up to you. Telekinesis is a very useful power, as you can throw back grenades tossed by nitro splicers and pull items towards you that you can't reach otherwise. Now Jack can progress closer to Steinman and learn more about his application to Arkham Asylum.
Today I had lunch with the goddess. Steinman, she said, I'm here to free you from the tyranny of the commonplace. I'm here to show you a new kind of beauty. I asked her, what do you mean, goddess? Symmetry, dear Steinman. It's time we did something about symmetry.
What can I do with this one, Aphrodite? She won't stay still! I want to make them beautiful, but they always turn out wrong! That was too fat! This one too tall! This one too symmetrical! And now, what's this, goddess? An intruder! He's ugly! 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 Ugly!
So yeah, it turns out living underwater and splicing yourself with slug extract is a bad mental cocktail and turned this once promising plastic surgeon into a madman obsessed with his twisted definition of aesthetic beauty as described to him by hallucinations of the goddess Aphrodite. And he's only the first boss! With the key in hand, all that's left to do is to go back to emergency access, which is easier said than done as a tunnel collapse forces Jack down a different path.
Stay away from her, or it is you who will be shot next.
This is the genius German Dr. Brigitte Tenenbaum, who according to Atlas is the mind behind the Little Sisters. Atlas also says Jack can harvest the Little Sisters to get Adam in order to buy more plasmids and tonics, while Tenenbaum says he can instead save them and get less Adam, though she promises to make it worth his while.
What do you mean by that?
This is where the game's core moral dilemma comes in. Jack's journey will be noticeably more difficult if he doesn't harvest the little sisters, and the only downside to harvesting them is that the little sister will die after you pull the slug out. As Tenenbaum puts it, it's like taking a terminal patient off of life support. Or you can choose to cure the little girl of her creepy nightmare status and hope the reward Tenenbaum promises is worth it. Since I have a heart and the director likes this ending way more, we're going to be saving them. Fun fact, the added audio log explaining how harvesting the little sisters is more like taking a patient off of life support instead of murdering them is because the game's publisher and press weren't too thrilled about a game where you can murder little girls. Long story short, Tenenbaum discovered sea slugs near Rapture that excreted Adam, but not enough to properly test and experiment with. She somehow found that implanting them into the stomach of specifically little girls created a symbiotic relationship leading to 30 times the Adam production. Now they go around collecting Adam from the corpses around Rapture, accompanied by Big Daddies to protect them from the living splicers that want their Adam. We learn more about them as the story goes on, so that's all you need to know for now. And now you're ready to fight a Big Daddy, right? Right? Well, if you said no, don't worry because you don't actually have to fight them. In what was revolutionary AI for the time, the Big Daddy will leave you alone if it doesn't think you pose a threat. Get too close to their little sister and they'll push you away. They won't attack you until you attack them, and going through them is the only way to save or harvest the little sister and get her Adam. These fights are pretty much always stressful, though damage carries over with death, so it's not as bad as it could be. And it's always satisfying taking one down. The pause menu will also show you how many little sisters you need to save in each level, so pay attention to that in order to get the maximum amount of Adam from each level in order to buy more plasmids and tonics at Gatherer's Garden stations, regardless of which path you go down. Fun fact about little sisters, they weren't originally little girls at all. They were just big slugs called gatherers, but the director wanted players to sympathize and connect with them, and after passing on this design, they settled on the now iconic little sister design. You decide if they're more or less creepy after you save them. With that, we're finally free to head onto Neptune's bounty and attempt to rescue Atlas's family, who, according to Atlas, are hiding in a submarine located in Fontaine Fisheries. The first thing of note in Neptune's bounty is the debut of the other kind of Big Daddy, the Rosie with their rivet gun. Do you get it? The more recognizable version, the Bouncer, only has a drill arm. Both were originally just suits used to build Rapture. Bouncers drilled rocks and minerals, while Rosies riveted panels and windows. The Rosies are much harder to fight given that they also have proximity mines that they can throw. If you fought the Big Daddy in Medical and also the first one here, you'll get the first reward from Tenenbaum, which will be given in the form of a teddy bear in front of a Gatherer's Garden machine. The gifts usually include a good amount of Adam, a plasmid, and anything from health kits to weapon ammo. The game director actually regrets making these rewards so valuable, as he really wanted to stress that taking the moral road and sparing the little sisters was going to make your life harder. The Game Grumps machines also have plasmid slots and health and Eve boosts that are definitely useful to have, though I personally only use 2 plasmids that the game doesn't give you for free. The entrance to the fisheries is locked by a man named Peach Wilkins, who will only let you enter if you get him a research camera for some reason. And then Jack is ambushed by a spider splicer, capable of ceiling crawling and Harley Quinn flip theatrics. In order to make up for the fact that he's sending you on a random fetch quest, Peach sends Jack a grenade launcher, which most people will exclusively use on Big Daddies going forward. Peach is also incredibly paranoid about Frank Fontaine, the not-so-clean businessman who business ran the fisheries. According to Atlas, he's not so alive either, though paranoia around him is a common affliction that went as high as Andrew Ryan, supported by an audio log demonstrating Ryan's men torturing one of Fontaine's men for information on Fontaine's smuggling ring. Speaking of audio logs, while not important to the story, there's one from a woman who lost her daughter Masha and tells her the door code to their apartment in case she finds it.
That's a surprise tool that can help us later.
Progressing on and finding more logs about frankly shady Frankie investing in the Adam business early brings Jack to the research camera, an incredibly helpful tool if not a bit of an annoyance. Photographing different kinds of splicers increases your your research progress on them. Fill the bar and you'll earn some form of reward, usually in the form of damage bonuses against that type of enemy or a special tonic. You can also photograph the bots, turrets, and cameras, and I highly recommend doing the first two, as maximizing their research progress will allow you to hack them instantly. Since Peach is buying for time or something, he then tasks Jack with photographing 3 spider splicers before he returns. The way back includes a free security bullseye plasmid, which will turn cameras against whichever enemy you hit it with. Very situational and not very helpful when you can just hack the cameras. Atlas kindly asks Jack to return to Peach, but there's more to explore in the area. 2 more important audio logs reveal that Tenenbaum reluctantly started working with Fontaine's smugglers for lab supplies, and Andrew Ryan introduced the death penalty in Rapture for the smugglers. Yet more audio logs showcase how Ryan's lack of understanding the importance of the atom business helped Fontaine gain control of it unopposed and further build his reputation by establishing Fontaine poorhouses. Also, this.
We saw our Masha today. We barely recognize her. That's her, Sam said. You're crazy, I told him. That thing? That is our Masha? But he was right. She was drawing blood out of a corpse by Fontaine Fisheries. And then when she was done, she walked off hand in hand with one of those awful golems. Masha!
It's things like this that really make the game stand out even still. The story of Masha and her parents isn't at all important to the plot, and it's entirely missable, but by paying attention and thoroughly exploring Rapture, you're treated to stories like this that show different perspectives during Rapture's downfall and flesh out the world in usually depressing ways. But hey, if Masha stuck around Fontaine Fisheries for however long since then, odds are we rescued her already. Atlas talks about his wife Moira and his son Patrick, and frankly I'm surprised they haven't suffocated in that Fontaine submarine by now. Returning with the camera and photos, Peach finally lets Jack in, but not before he places all his weapons in the pneumatic tube. Once again, Peach accuses Jack of working with Frank Fontaine and doing his dirty work, despite the fact that Atlas told him to let us in, and now Jack has to fight him with only his plasmids and wrench. Luckily, he's a nitro splicer, so you can just toss his grenades back at him and light him on fire for a very easy fight. Walking downstairs will land Jack basically right in front of the first Power to the People machine, a one-use weapon upgrade machine that you will find scattered throughout the game, usually off the beaten path. This is another contribution to, as the developers put it, making the game feel like an FPS plus instead of an RPG light, by allowing players to upgrade the weapons as they see fit. Also, I really like how the upgrades actually add designs to the weapons. Jack gets some flashes of his family and then flips the switch to let Atlas into the hideout and reunite him with his family, bringing about the wrath of Ryan.
Oh, Mark, if only your friend could look up and see. Maybe something, anything, except just stand here and watch him die.
They're everywhere! I can't hold them! Got to fall back! Get me family out and we'll regroup as soon as we can!
He got out of there real quick, so I guess you could say Atlas shrugged them off. Oh, well, I guess that joke bombed. No, but seriously, Patrick and Moira exist only in Atlas's head now. And he weepingly tells Jack to go through the door to Arcadia. Jack's goal is to get to the bathysphere in Rolling Hills and get to and kill Andrew Ryan, but first he has to go through what I personally consider to be the weakest section of the game. We are introduced to the Houdini splicers, who can teleport and shoot fire, and find an audio log from Tenenbaum implying that her supply of little girls for the Little Sister program came from Frank Fontaine's Little Sister's orphanage when the two were working together. This is also where the last vending machine is introduced. You invent. Using components that you can now scrounge up allows you to invent special ammo, auto-hack tools, and other things free of charge. While walking through this underwater park, I'm reminded that Atlas still hasn't addressed the whole attacking Rapture on New Year's Eve thing. You got anything for me?
You might hear things about me, see my name about, think what you will. There was a time I cared about politics, but it's just an excuse men use to kill one another. I'm done with all that. I just want to see the sunlight again.
Seems pretty genuine to me. Speaking of which, we get a mini speech from Andrew Ryan that shows just how seriously dedicated he is to his ideology.
On the surface, I once bought a forest. The parasites claimed that the land belonged to God and demanded that I establish a public park there. Why? So the rabble could stand slack-jawed under the canopy and pretend that it was paradise earned. Congress moved to nationalize my forest. I burnt it to the ground. God did not plant the seeds of this Arcadia.
This game does a great job showing how Ryan's fierce laissez-faire governing and fully free market belief system have both pros and cons, making him more than just another madman like Steinman. It led to the creation of this beautiful city and unparalleled scientific advancements, but the system was manipulated and tainted by this Fontaine guy, and Ryan firmly sticking to his beliefs allowed him to go unchecked until he dies. Ryan's story is also more immediately important as he pumps something into the air to kill the trees, thus putting Arcadia in lockdown and threatening to suffocate everyone in Rapture. How else do you think they get air all the way down here?
I won't let you blow this.
Jack meets up with the woman who runs Arcadia, Julie Langford, who tells Jack she can reverse it if he can get her a certain flower, though Ryan isn't too happy about this and gives Julie the treatment and pumps something into the room to kill her. She writes the code to her safe before she dies, which holds the formula for creating her Lazarus vector, thus setting up the next fetch quest, as Jack has to retrieve the materials, which Atlas says he'll find in the farmer's market. The road to which contains an audio log from Tenenbaum that shows her change of heart that led her to going from creating little sisters to wanting to cure them.
What makes something like me? I look at genes all day long, and never do I see the blueprint of sin. I could blame the Germans, but in truth I did not find tormentors in the prison camp, but kindred spirits. These children I brutalized have awoken something inside that for most is beautiful and natural, but in me is an abomination. My maternal instinct.
Women.
After searching the farmer's market for distilled water and honeybee spit, it just so happens the buildings specializing in wine and bees are right next to each other. Jack creates the Lazarus vector and pumps it through the central misting control, though he has to defend the lab from a mob of splicers while it works. This isn't a very tough tower defense section, given that there are never very many splicers at a time, turrets to act to your side, and plenty of spots to make your plasmids more effective. It just goes on for a bit too long, given how easy it is. With that done and the trees back to life, it's time to head on to Fort Frolic, the last stop before Andrew Ryan's office in Hephaestus. Fort Frolic is controlled by someone named Sander Cohen, who Atlas describes as a Section 8. Surely he won't be too big of a problem, though.
That's better. Atlas Ryan. Atlas Ryan. Da 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 da. Time-wise, you could get something decent on the radio. The artist has a duty to seduce the ear and delight the spirit. So say goodbye to those two blowhards, and hello to an evening with Sander Cohen.
Oh, he's a problem. Yep, to get through Fort Frolic to Hephaestus, Jack's going to have to get the key from Sander, also a Batman villain, Cohen. See, both Cohen and Steinman are spliced up madmen obsessed with using humans in their field of work, but instead of surgery, Cohen's vice is artistry. Wow, they were just really calling anyone an artist after World War II. Side note, I like how breaking the storefront window summons security bots to dissuade vandalism. With everything going wrong in Rapture, good to know they still have no patience for vandals. Your enjoyment of Fort Frolic will depend heavily on how much you enjoy staying in practically the same area for about 2 hours. There's also a bit of a jump in difficulty in order to essentially force the player into upgrading their plasmids to levels 2 and 3, so this area can very easily burn a player out. We push on. Exploring Fort Frolic while ignoring the beckoning call of Sander Cohen will reward you with the start of the story about the rivalry between Sander Cohen and fellow artist Anna Culpepper. The next log from Diane about how criminals are being rounded up in a place called Apollo Square, and the reveal that someone made a musical about Atlas's family, and, well, we know how that story ends. Apparently they did too. Following Sander's instructions and entering his theater introduces Jack to the main gimmick of this area, as he asks Jack to photograph his former protege Fitzpatrick after Sander blows him to the big city in the sky. Not that one. Jack then has to place that photograph in Cohen's quad-tick in the main atrium, and yes, those are real dead people. Yes, the rest of the section is doing that exact thing 3 more times. Finding someone specific, killing them, photographing them, and putting their photos on display. Though it seems Sander knows his mission is very repetitive because he decides to reward Jack with a crossbow, the last and my favorite weapon in the game. You get a chemical thrower in Langford's office that I rarely ever use. The crossbow can take down basically every enemy not in a souped up diving suit in 1 or 2 shots, and you can retrieve your bolts from the enemies. The first unwilling subject is the Mr. Freeze quoting Martin Finnegan, the final popsicle between Jack and Poseidon Plaza, the other main area of Fort Frolic. You could take down Silas Cobb and Hector Rodriguez to complete the quad tick, or you could explore more and discover that Sander Cohen was Andrew Ryan's favorite artist because he was little more than a flamboyant propaganda machine. We should call him Cohen, the very underrated plasmid that is Insect Swarm, and the probably unimportant story of adult performer Jasmine Jolene.
I'm sorry, Mr. Ryan. I didn't know. I didn't know Fontaine had something to do with it. What are you doing? No! No, please! I loved you, don't please, no! No! Me tell you how grand you are. I've tried to explain. That creepy Dr. Tenenbaum promised me it wasn't going to be a real pregnancy. They just take the egg out once Mr. Ryan and I had... Oh, I needed the money so bad. But I know Mr. Ryan's gonna suss it out. Gonna know I wasn't being careful. Gonna know I sold the... Mr. Ryan's gonna be so mad at me.
Huh, no, Jasmine, you're being a pessimist. Ryan's not gonna be mad at you. Back on track, Jack, completing the quad tick summons Cohen himself, and it only leads to a boss fight if you want it to, as he won't act aggressive toward you unless you take the first swing. You at least want to wait until he opens the display for an upgraded tonic, though. And it's better in the long run to leave him alive, as it will allow Jack to access a power to the People Station that he won't be able to if Cohen dies here. Regardless, Jack reconnects with Atlas and is kindly instructed to head on to the Hephaestus, the lair of Andrew Ryan. Am I the only one who finds it weird that the foundational phrase of Rapture is no gods or kings, only man, yet several important locations are named after mythological gods? Port Neptune, Poseidon Plaza, Hephaestus, and we all know there's an Apollo Square somewhere. Anyway, Atlas gives us our next task.
Now would you kindly head to Ryan's office and kill the son of a bitch?
You know, Atlas, I don't think you can kindly kill somebody, but I get it, you're trying to get your new catchphrase over. Progressing on brings Jack into the entrance of Definitely a Sane Man's office, but the door is extra locked. In order to open it, he has to perform a sympathetic overload in harmonic core number 3, aka activate a special EMP. Luckily, most of said EMP is already complete, and it's up to Jack to collect the last few pieces. While exploring Hephaestus and the geothermal power plant that powers Rapture, we learn a bit more about the feud between Andrew Ryan and Frank Fontaine. After Fontaine went down in a blaze of glory, Ryan nationalized Fontaine Futuristics, which goes against the foundation of Rapture, and the army of splicers that rampaged Rapture on New Year's Eve for Atlas were originally Fontaine's army living in the poorhouses he set up. The panic after that event is what led the citizens into injecting themselves with the barely tested substances that had no studies done on long-term side effects or damages. Like that would ever happen. With the bomb complete, all that's left is to bring it up to the core, which can be done after a brief tower defense section that is very easy as long as you hack the turrets and use trap bolts and proximity mines. With the bomb bursted and the defense destroyed, Jack can finally head into Andrew Ryan's home base. What do you have to say to that, Ryan?
Even in the Book of Lies, sometimes you find truth. There is indeed a season for all things. And now that I see you flesh to flesh and blood to blood, I know I cannot raise my hand against you. But know this, you are my greatest disappointment. Does your master hear me? Atlas, you can kill me, but you will never have my city! My strength is not in steel and fire. That is what the parasites will never understand. A season for all things. A time to live and a time to die. A time to build and a time to destroy! From now, my child, there is one final thing to discuss.
Oh, well, that'll do it. There's also an audio log that explains the Vita chambers Jack has been using to revive each time he dies. According to Andrew Ryan and some definitely not important later guy named Sinclair, it involves plasmid reconstruction and quantum entanglement, because it was only a matter of time before a game made me explain quantum mechanics. Basically, quantum entanglement means that two particles become linked and stay linked no matter how far apart they are, contradicting the principle of locality. Objects can only be influenced by their immediate surroundings, and Einstein's belief that nothing travels faster than the speed of light, as changes to one quantum entangled particle will immediately reflect on the other even if they are billions of light years apart. Anyway, somehow that all makes the Vita chambers revive the dead, though Dr. Suchong says it's only tuned to Andrew Ryan's genetic frequency. Anyway, we can move on to more simple things like
she's very pretty.
Thank you, Papa Suchong.
Break her neck for me. What? Break that sweet puppy's neck. No, please. Break that puppy's neck. Would you kindly? No. No. Very good.
well, hey, Andrew Ryan's just ahead.
In the end, what separates a man from a slave? Money? Power? No. A man chooses. A slave obeys. You think you have memories. A farm. A family. An airplane. A crash. And then this place. Was there really a family? Did that airplane crash? Or was it hijacked? Forced down. Forced down by something less than a man. Something bred to sleepwalk through life until they are activated by a simple phrase spoken by their kindly master. Was a man sent to kill? Or a slave? A man chooses. A slave obeys. Come in. Stop, would you kindly? Would you kindly? Powerful phrase. Familiar phrase.
Would you kindly? Would you kindly get this? Would you kindly find that? Would you kindly find that? Would you kindly find? Would you kindly get this? Would you kindly head to Ryan's office and kill the son of a bitch?
Sit, would you kindly? Stand, would you kindly? Run! Stop! Turn. A man chooses. A slave obeys.
Hurry now! Grab Ryan's genetic key! Now would you kindly put it in that goddamn machine?
I don't see why not.
Nice work, Bio. It's time to end this masquerade. There ain't no Atlas kid. Never was. Selling my line of work takes on a variety of aliases. Hell, once
Well, that's a lot to unpack, so let's take a few steps back and go over this iconic plot twist in more detail, Jack. Jack's real parents are Andrew Ryan and Jasmine Jolene, which explains why Jack was able to use the Vita Chambers, and Jasmine sold the baby to Doctors Tenenbaum and Suchong, working under Frank Fontaine, for experimenting, where Jack was conditioned to follow any phrase preceded or succeeded by the phrase, "would you kindly." All the memories he had before then were implanted, and he was sent out into the real world until summoned back by Frank Fontaine to help win the war for Rapture against Andrew Ryan. Frank faked his death and was reborn as Atlas, putting on the facade of a revolutionary fighting for the people of Rapture. There's more to it than that, but they go over it later in this game or in another one, so hey, I don't have to talk about it now.
I think we just found our loophole. Literally.
But yes, this is one of the best and most memorable plot twists in video games. You'll be hard-pressed to find a single list of best plot twists that doesn't have this on it. And Irrational Games went through a lot of trial and error to get it right. First, it took them a while to get the phrase right. They considered Excelsior because Ken Levine is a huge Stan Lee fan, the Latin translation of "for God," or the Latin phrase "Sedo Maiori," which means "I yield to a greater person." However, they wanted something that could naturally be slipped into conversation without drawing too much attention. Then there was the issue with Atlas. Originally he was going to have a southern accent, but focus tests found that players immediately distrusted him. So much for southern hospitality. So they had to get a new voice actor and rewrite the lines. And as great as this plot twist is, I do think it also represents the peak of the game, and nothing that comes after it really lives up to that moment or the game before it. But I always go all the way, so let's get right back to it. Jack wakes up in the hidden room that Tenenbaum has been gathering the rescued little sisters in and tells Jack that she has undone some of the mind control, but not all of it. In order to undo the rest, Jack has to venture to Suchong's apartment in Mercury Suites, but Fontaine isn't going to make it easy. He activates Code Yellow, which instructs Jack's brain to tell his heart to stop beating. However, it's going to take some time, so in-game it's represented as your maximum health occasionally going down, meaning you are most definitely going to die in this area roughly a ton of times. This is also where sparing Sander Cohen comes into effect, as Jack can walk into his apartment. Sander, if alive, won't take too kindly to this and arrive to engage in a fight. If Jack killed Cohen in Fort Frolic, the door upstairs will remain locked with no way to open it. Speaking of Cohen, we find out that his artistic rival Anna Culpepper was executed by one of Andrew Ryan's men for committing the dastardly crime of creating art that didn't paint Rapture and Ryan as the wholly altruistic saviors of mankind like Cohen did. Suchong's apartment doesn't contain the cure as hoped, but it does contain a fortuitous audio log that reveals that Fontaine had Suchong make an antidote to the mind control called Lot 192, which can most likely be found in Suchong's office in Apollo Square. And while Tenenbaum was never told about Lot 192 or what it did, she figured they were up to something and stole a sample, so Jack's time in Mercury Suites isn't over yet. Turns out Tenenbaum's apartment has since been raided by Fontaine's men, and the Nevadians had some really nice things to say. So now Jack has to climb even further to Fontaine's penthouse and retrieve the stolen Lot 192 sample. The sample isn't too hard to find, and drinking it reverses the effects and restores Jack's max health, though it comes with its own set of problems, as now his plasmid structure is unstable, meaning you will not be able to control what plasmid is equipped, and it will continue to change even to ones you haven't even bought. With one annoyance replacing another, Jack can head on into Apollo Square, which looks about as good as you'd expect given that the one thing we heard about it was that criminals were being rounded up there. Unlike other areas, I highly recommend heading straight for the main objective, as collecting the second dose of Lot 192, past a dead-ass Suchong killed by a Big Daddy for slapping a little sister, will cure Jack of the plasmid randomizer setting. The other place of interest is Fontaine Center for the Poor, where we get the conclusion of the Diane McClintock story that has been slowly drip-fed throughout the game, learning that she fell in with Atlas and his Che Guevara quotes, and how that ended for her.
We went on a raid outside the wire today. We snagged 31 rounds of buckshot, 4 frag grenades, a shotgun, and 34 Atom. We lost McGee, Epstein, and Vallette. We got one of those goddamn Big Daddies in the bargain, though. It was something awful they had to do to that little girl to get the Atom, but we didn't start this thing. Ryan did. I can't wait to tell Atlas. He'll be so pleased.
Never play a man for the short con when you can play him for the long one. Atlas is the longest con of all. Ryan wanted Frank Fontaine dead. I just gave him what he wanted. As Atlas, I got a new face, a clean record, and a fresh start. Now, it's time to take back Rapture.
They'll be so pleased.
Oh, Mrs. McClintock! What are you doing here? Let me just turn this off.
Yeah, so she was killed to make sure Frank's secret stayed a secret. I know I already mentioned that the developers had like $10 to make this game, so they couldn't afford many character models, but I really wish they got new models for Diane and Jasmine for the remastered version that I'm covering. Pretty much the only immersion-breaking thing in this whole game is that both of them are represented with generic splicer models. And now we head off to Point Prometheus for the final confrontation. Frank isn't too keen on facing Jack, so he obstructs the way, and the only option to get the door open is to temporarily transform into a Big Daddy, as only little sisters can open the door and they won't trust Jack otherwise. Though, I don't know why Tenenbaum doesn't just send one of the ones I've saved to open it, but I digress. Jack has to look like a Big Daddy, sound like a Big Daddy, and even smell like a Big Daddy, which means one final fetch quest to retrieve pheromone samples, suit pieces, and voice box modification that Jack will somehow come back from. Also, putting on the helmet fisheyes the fuck out of the lens, and you have to play like that for the rest of the game because why make video games enjoyable? We also get the final pieces of the Ryan-Fontaine feud for now, as Ryan discovered the little sisters and Big Daddies after taking over Fontaine Futuristics and realizing their necessity in Rapture now, did what every good capitalist does and marketed them, hence the creepy-ass porcelain statues besides the good game stations. And you've probably been wondering just what the heck is underneath those suits this whole time. And, well, it's about as messed up as you'd expect. We learn about them in more detail in roughly 8 years, but for now we learn that the people inside the Big Daddy suits have their skin and organs grafted straight into the suit so that they can't take it off. For extra fun, here's concept art of a Big Daddy without the helmet. Oh, great heavens! Now able to progress past the door, Jack has to endure the worst part of the game before he can confront Frank, as he must protect the little sister through the Proving Grounds, as splicers will try to attack her while she sucks the atom out of angels and repeats the same like 3 dialogue lines 800 times. Luckily, there are a lot of things to help you out here. Unfortunately, there's also an annoying ass bug where the little sister will freeze after the second test subject, preventing Jack from moving on further and requiring the player to load their most recent save and do the whole section again.
Oh, my favorite.
Even then, there's a chance she'll get frozen again, and the player will have no choice but to start the whole game over again. I actually ran into this bug while getting the gameplay for this video, but luckily it fixed itself after I reloaded my save. Also, you do not lose if the little sister dies, though Tenenbaum will be very disappointed in you and send another one. But that's it. Nothing else stands in the way between Jack and Fontaine, and it's time for the final boss fight that even the game developers know is super lame. Frank is now a spliced up titan of a man with a plethora of powerful plasmid powers to painfully put paid to protagonist Jack, though he's not too hard to avoid. Just lay into him with your guns and plasmids and eventually he'll have to recharge, where you use the little sister atom extractor to suck out his atom. Repeat 3 more times while Frank brings in security bots and splicers, and the game will quickly wrap up like a poorly paced TV show.
They offered you this city. And you refused it. And what did you do instead? What I've come to expect of you. You saved them. You gave them the one thing that was stolen from them. A chance. A chance to learn. To find love. To live. And in the end, what was your reward? You never said. But I think I know. A family.
The very rushed bad ending that the developers really didn't want to put in the game but were required to instead has Jack taking control of Rapture and bringing the splicers to the surface in order to get control of nuclear bombs and start a global war. Yeah, it's clear which ending you're intended to get. But with that, Jack's story in Rapture has come to a close, and now it's time for my journey with this game to follow suit. What can be said about this game that hasn't already been said in the 15 years since it came out? It's an absolutely revolutionary game that created a perfect marriage between first-person shooter and role-playing game that also decided to become the definitive shining example of environmental storytelling with an immersive and ever-changing plot and an all-time iconic twist to boot. Rapture is one of, if not the greatest video game environments ever created, managing to feel both expansive and suffocating at the same time, creating this constant feeling of tension and dread that really only slightly dissipates in the Arcadia section. Each explorable interior is incredibly detailed and tells its own story, really showing how much love and effort the developers put into the creation of this city, and the merging of Art Deco and bright neon creates an unforgettable style. In fact, the game director even said that a couple of developers spent time writing a backstory on how every single person in Fort Frolic died, even if it was as simple as them crawling a few feet before bleeding out. And that level of detail carries over into the characters, as Jack, Ryan, Fontaine, Tenenbaum, Steinman, Cohen, the Little Sisters, and the Big Daddies are all very memorable and defined characters that will stick in the minds of everyone who engages with it. Even characters who are already dead before the game starts, like Diane McClintock and Bill McDonough, manage to be memorable in their own right thanks to the journeys they go through in the audio logs. If I had to complain about something, it would probably be the gameplay. Funny, since the developers focused on gameplay over story and managed to create one of the most memorable and defining stories of all time, with gameplay constantly playing second fiddle. I mentioned how it was revolutionary for its time, and I'm definitely not saying it's bad now, just a bit repetitive at times, especially the hacking, and hard to go back to once you see how much it's improved on later. But as I've said before, I don't hold games accountable for the improvements or flaws of their sequels. With all that being said, my final score for BioShock is a 9 out of 10. I basically spoiled the whole game for you if you haven't played it, and really none of my videos should be watched before you play the game if you actually want to experience the story for yourself, but BioShock will forever be one of those games that every fan of gaming should play at least once in their lives, even if it's not their style. With all that needs to be said and done in Rapture being spoken and completed, you'd think we're on schedule for Ascension. But that's not the case, as 8 years from now, Rapture's swan song begins. I hope to see you there.